Welcome back to this podcast series Between Now and Next, as we explore that threshold between collapse and renewal. In this episode, we're going to talk about discernment, which is a form of finding true north, especially in confusing and disorienting times. And I want to stress again that if you're feeling confused or disoriented, or just like you're in an unknown space, you are exactly where you need to be right now. You are exactly positioned between now and next. You're in a threshold moment, and it is the position that is aligning yourself with systematic change that is following what is emergent just on the horizon of our awareness. So in this episode, we're going to talk about discernment as a way of finding true north, that inner compass within ourselves that stays steady and solid and secure, even when everything around us is beginning to shift and change and collapse. And so when we navigate complexity with wisdom, what happens is those simplistic answers fail and certainty is elusive. And you may notice it because someone wants to kind of give you that pat phrase of it's going to be okay, or, you'll find your way, and it kind of grates on us, or it doesn't feel so good. And that's because those very reductionist answers don't get to the depth of some of the experiences that we are living through right now. And as certainty becomes more elusive, we may want to grasp and search for anything that feels stable and solid. And the answer, of course, is always within ourselves. So as usual, in this podcast, we're going to look not just at science and research, but some practical ancient wisdom traditions drawing on consciousness and spirituality, contemplative practices and insights that can support you, and ways of discerning and being that can cultivate that deeper inner knowing, especially in an age where we're just overloaded by information and truth is very elusive. So as always, I want to start with a very personal story, and particularly it's looking at the possibility of escaping binary thinking, that categorical, what is right and wrong, or good or bad, or welcome or unwelcome in our experience. It's non-dual thinking. It's really the pathway of non-duality that can help us find that inner compass of true north once again. So there was about a period of 3 months in which every major aspect of my life changed. And of course, it was after, a very catastrophic event, but literally I moved. I changed jobs in terms of actually being dismissed from my job at the time due to health reasons. So my health was failing, and there was chronic stress that was leading to some health concerns. And then my family life was chaotic in terms of some heightened needs for our children, tension in my marriage, and all of that was in the aftermath of such a catastrophic event. But every single thing I could think of was changing. And most of all, there was a lot of financial instability and insecurity due to all of those circumstances. And I reached a point in time, which is really like the bottom of the barrel, or where things just kind of, the earth gives out from beneath your feet, and you feel yourself falling into an abyss in which you know nothing, and there is nothing that is familiar anymore, in which non-duality emerged. The saving grace, or the pathway through so many circumstances that were changing so rapidly, was to know that everything that was happening was neither right or wrong or good or bad. And you may immediately say, I don't know how to do that. And that's where allowing, releasing, letting go, and actually falling into that space of the unknown, even acknowledging it within yourself of, I do not know what is going to happen, what my life holds for me, and even what might be good or bad right now. It's moving into that place of deep surrender and allowing some of that cynicism to fall away and curiosity to take its place that can immediately open us into the pathway of unknowing and the foundation of non-dual thinking. So over time, I began to see where there were multiple perspectives around what was happening in my life. And there were many vantage points that I was beginning to develop that were somehow diversifying my perception when the right and wrong began to fall away. And then over time, and it wasn't just in hindsight, along the way, I was getting breadcrumbs, little hints that some things were kind of being taken care of or working themselves out. For example, there was, some financial resources that seemingly sort of came out of nowhere. A new place to live emerged without really even trying hard. As one job fell away, some other possibilities came into place. Things began to stabilize somehow in the family system. And sure enough, health conditions began to follow, especially with some of the reduced stress of so many circumstances changing over time. And so at the heart of this question of allowing things to be as they are without needing to label them as good or bad or right or wrong, welcome or unwelcome, to quote Rumi, the real challenge is that it cannot be approached just intellectually. And this is where gaze comes in. The gaze was what supported me to perceive non-dually what was happening in my life, to enter an expanded state of consciousness in which there was natural interconnection with what I was experiencing. It was not happening to me. I was in a co-creative relationship with it. And these circumstances that were so challenging were beginning to come forward in the form of being a teacher, a helpmate, a companion, and a guide. Now, that is not easy. And that's why expanded states are the pathway to begin to experience that sort of way of interacting with circumstances that we absolutely do not want to be in relationship with. And so the real challenge is that we tend to intellectualize many of those experiences when the approach is far more existential, intuitive, soulful, spiritual, conscious. It's a way of engaging with the rich meaning, depth, value, and purpose of any of these circumstances, so that the real pearl that is within even moments of suffering can start to come forward. And this is where discernment comes in. Discernment is not a mental exercise. It is far more of an embodied practice. You are discerning what is true, what is meaningful, what is supportive. And without that, we can be very vulnerable to manipulation, paralysis, or a sense of false certainty. So the conventional approaches of critical thinking are insufficient when we are facing large and heightened amounts of complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty, turmoil in our life. All of these challenges that are not going to be met with an analytic rigor. Instead, it's about a deeper integration of intellect, intuition, embodied knowing, and even an ethical compass on the inside that knows what is right. So let's look at the science behind discernment. We know that conventional methods of knowledge, and in terms of knowledge acquisition, that it focuses on critical thinking and logical analysis. And these approaches can be very vulnerable to cognitive biases, these predictive errors in reasoning that affect even those who would say they are mentally astute or even well-educated. These biases are particularly problematic because in complex, uncertain situations where many variables are interacting, future outcomes are very hard to predict. So when we think of our hemispheric function, the right and the left hemisphere, our culture has, of course, overemphasized left hemisphere dominance in terms of processing. And this is where our right hemisphere, that focuses on abstraction, categorization, explicit reasoning, can have contextual understanding embodied knowing, and perception of relationship between parts. And again, just to be clear, that is in contrast to the left hemisphere's focus on abstraction, categorization, and explicit reasoning. So the right hemisphere is far more focused on contextual understanding, embodied knowing, and the perception of relationships between all of these parts. So we have an imbalance, especially when systems are complex, and analytical approaches are just not going to be sufficient. So there's some beautiful research that when we are navigating complexity, it requires integrating multiple modes of knowing, not just analytics, but intuitive, embodied, and relational modes of perception. And in that way, genuine expertise isn't characterized by formulaic analysis, but by pattern recognition, the ability to perceive meaningful relationships that are not obvious to novices or at a first glance. This capacity is what develops as we develop extensive experience in domains and we create neural networks that process information intuitively before conscious reasoning. So what is most encouraging in these in-between times, these emergent seasons of life, is that these integrative ways of knowing can be cultivated through practice. Particularly, there are 5 key components that can help us to cultivate this way of knowing. It is rich factual knowledge, rich procedural knowledge, lifespan context, value relativism, and perhaps the most importantly, is simply recognizing uncertainty. So those who are wise notice that there is a greater capacity to navigate ambiguity. They actually are able to navigate ambiguity, hold contradictory perceptions together, and make sound judgments in complex situations using these forms of wisdom, whether having a large knowledge base, procedural knowledge, how to actually do something, being able to put things in the context of one's lifespan, having an adherence to values and character, and the recognition of uncertainty. So a story for all of us to hold on to that comes from the Sufi tradition and also is within the Hindu tradition is the idea of feeling into the elephant. And the story goes something like this. There was an elephant that came into a town, and there were 6 blind individuals that heard that something new had come into town. They had never encountered an elephant before, so they all gathered around to examine it and to touch it by its nature. The first individual said, "This elephant is like a solid wall, solid and sturdy," because he was feeling the side. The second man felt the tusk and said, "No, the elephant is like a spear, smooth, hard, and pointed." The third man held the trunk and insisted, "You're both wrong. The elephant is like a snake, flexible and moving." The fourth man grasped at the leg and said, "No, the elephant is exactly like a fan. It's flat, thin, moves with the air." The sixth man held the tail and said, "This elephant is like a rope. It's thin and it's flexible." They began arguing, and each convinced of his own perception and dismissing the others. After a while, a wise person went by, a traveler, and asked about the disagreement. And the wise person said, the traveler said, "You are all correct, and you are all mistaken. Each of you has perceived one part truthfully, but none has perceived the whole. Only by combining your perceptions and recognizing their partiality might you understand what an elephant truly is." And this story is the idea between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge perceives parts accurately. Wisdom recognizes the relationship between parts and the larger whole that it constitutes. Particularly in times of complexity and polarization, the capacity to integrate partial truths while maintaining awareness of what is unknown is the essential skill for discernment. I invite you to listen with me to this wonderful poem by the great Wendell Berry called "The Real Work." And as you contemplate discernment in your own life, listen to these words of Barry's wisdom that reminds us that confusion and uncertainty, while it's uncomfortable, are not obstacles to discernment. Instead, they are the starting point. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And when we no longer know which way to go, we have begun our real journey. The mind that is baffled is not employed. The impeding stream is the one that sings. So let's explore together 3 conscious strategies for cultivating a spirit of discernment in your life. And this is not a fixed destination in point of you've arrived and now you're wise, but instead this is an ongoing process to perceive with greater clarity, nuance, and an overarching umbrella of wisdom. So the first strategy is some perspective rotation, which is often called the observer stance or the taking the third perspective witnessing view. Essentially, you're creating some distance. You're stepping back from an immediacy of your viewpoint, really not being able to see what's happening in your life. And it can improve your reasoning in terms of complex issues. So you are adopting, going back to the idea of the elephant, multiple diverse perspectives around whatever is, occurring in your life as you are processing these changes that are happening in the world to reduce bias and to enhance, wisdom related reasoning. So when we're taking on a complex situation or decision, you may want to rotate through these many perspectives. It's a zoomed in view, looking at the specifics of details or impact, any kind of concrete aspects of the situation. Then you are zooming out to develop more of a systems view, how different elements interact. You're exploring what patterns may be there and systemic factors that are influencing a situation. So it means, what do you see from within? What do you see or perceive from outside? And then we want to take the long-term view, which is often can be approached through the gaze method of the panoramic vision, that forward, far, and wide gaze across a very broad horizon. And that will distort your perception of time. It will create future time perceptions so that you may notice how the decision you're facing may look in 5, 15, 50 years, 500 years. So you develop not just a zoomed out view that's looking on you and your own circumstances, but that very dispersed, broad view that really takes in future time. And this kind of perception actually strengthens neural networks that are associated with cognitive flexibility, and it reduces some activations in the brain that's related toward egocentric bias. It allows us to actually perceive beyond ourselves and our own particular attachments, especially to an outcome. And then the second strategy is to enhance your embodied sensing. And all of these strategies that we've talked about so far, all of them have included an embodied component. So in this particular practice, you want to return to the breath, and you want to begin by using a grounding breath. And these somatic markers can help us register any sort of subliminal, subtle patterns that are within the body before our conscious mind articulates them. So when you ground through the breath, you're taking 3 deep breaths down deep into the belly, and you're feeling your feet connect with the earth. And you're starting to connect with the physical space, the environment that's all around you. Then you are bringing to awareness one possible pathway related to your situation. So without analyzing it or evaluating it, you're letting a possibility pathway come forward. And then you notice how your body feels. In particular, you're noticing whether it goes weak and becomes very deflated. You may feel actually like the energy drains from your body, or whether it stays strong and solid and very resilient on the inside. And then you reflect on how your body is giving signals in terms of strength or weakness that may give you cues about what you are essentially discerning in your life. And this is using the basic, skill or awareness of interoception. And interoception is our ability to sense our internal body states. And this practice not just strengthens neural pathways about body awareness and decision making, but it enhances our capacity for an embodied wisdom. And then we may use a dialogical inquiry. So, ability to look at diverse viewpoints. And you'll note that in terms of dialogue, and it references the other, parts of this series so far that have had listening circles or resilience circles, you're going to want to gather a group with you, because those who actively engage in diverse viewpoints in a safe and contained space tend to develop better prediction capacities rather than operating in silos. So when you are using dialogical inquiry, you are gathering a group together. You can think of it as a discernment circle, which very much comes from the wisdom tradition of the Friends tradition, particularly drawing on the work of Parker Palmer. And when you're in a discernment circle, you're inviting a complex question to rise. You're articulating your question, perhaps about a decision that you're making in this great paradigm shift, something you've been thinking about or contemplating or wondering. You're asking and inviting for curious questions, that inquiry, not disguised as critiques, open-ended, evocative, curious, non-judgmental questions. Each person also names what they hear as valuable and salient in the conversation, and the group is also looking for deeper wisdom that wants to rise from the shared experience, patterns, principles, or questions that may also override some of the initial viewpoint that was brought into the discernment circle. This way of knowing and being is a participatory consciousness. It's a mode of collective knowing that transcends individual perceptions, and it honors the uniqueness of what each person is bringing into the group. And I want to stress again that each of these three suggestions, each of the three that I offer each time, the third one always has a communal approach. And I can't overstate it. It is necessary for us to gather in groups now more than ever to engage in expanded conscious practices, even listening, gathering, speaking, sharing in these collected groups, because it is what will support us not just to navigate between now and next, to navigate that threshold period, but to actually create resilient, strong, flexible spaces that truly will sustain us and become the bedrock, the very ground in which new concepts, new ways of being will come into fruition. It's often just uncovering what was already there or elevating systems that typically have not been heard, noticed, or valued before. So as we explore discernment, I want you to consider that perhaps the greatest wisdom of our time isn't certainty, but your ability to tolerate and embrace uncertainty. Uncertainty is not confusion. It is not indecision. It is what many spiritual traditions call the unknowing mind or the not knowing mind. The mind that remains open, curious, and humble, even while taking some decisive action forward. And when we are in times of profound change, rapid change that is accelerating day by day, discernment is not about reaching some sort of objective, universal, absolute truth. It's developing nuanced and integrative ways of knowing and being, and diversifying your perception of reality. And in that way, it's about developing the capacity for perception rotation, seeing things and perceiving things from many different sides, that embodied sensing or knowing from the inside, and the ability to engage in dialogue through inquiry. These aren't just techniques to learn. It's a different way of knowing and being that will guide you forward in your life. And as we are in between the breaking down of old systems and the emergence of new possibilities, our capacity for wise discernment is the essential skill that is needed, not just to make new decisions, but to recognize the deep patterns of meaning that are going to guide us through one threshold to another. So in our final episode, we're going to talk about the becoming, embodying new ways of being that is necessary for this great paradigm shift. And we will talk about insights, practices. We will look at lived experiences and how we can create an affirming and loving system that is truly applicable in very real world contexts. And as we close, know that the words of Wendell Berry are ringing within you and within me, that there is wisdom in the singing of the impending stream. Thank you for joining me in this space between now and next.